tonight is Andy Nowicki. He's the co-editor of The Alternative Right, the author of 8 books, including Under the Nile, I guess like Under the Nile.
Exactly.
The Columbine Pilgrim, Considering Suicide, and the most recent Conspiracy, Compliance, Control, and Defiance, a primer on what is and what is to be done. That will be the topic of our discussion tonight, at least for part of the discussion. And he's also the host of his own podcast, the Namelesss Podcast. That's the name of it?
That's correct, the Namelesss Podcast.
Namelesss Podcast, okay. And The Alternative Right, you're the co-editor. Well, I guess that's like that you have media there, you have podcasts and also written material at that website?
Oh, yeah, everything you can dream of and more. I mean, It's mostly articles, but yes, we also have a regular podcast that we sometimes post, and sometimes things from YouTube. So yeah, it's alternative-right.blogspot.com, or you could just key in Alternative Right and it'll get you there.
And I noticed one podcast has the picture. Is that Father Coughlin?
Yeah, that's right. We do have a picture of Father. That was Colin, the co-editor. He's really the main editor.
Okay.
I'm lucky to call myself a co-editor. I sort of, I think I deserve a demotion because Colin does most of the work, I think, most of the heavy grunt work. But he posted that picture of Father Conklin, I think, with the just to kind of be provocative and different.
It was funny. So this book, Conspiracy, Compliance, and Control, and Defiance. I like I picked up the description from Amazon. I'm just going to read it verbatim because I tried to improve on it. And I'll say, it says, Nowicki, did you write this?
Actually, I did.
Okay, very good. Okay.
I'm my own media team. Aren't I amazing?
You're great at promoting yourself.
It's good to be good at something.
That's good. Nowicki observes the ruthless, cold-blooded, patently reptilian nature of the contemporary ruling class, assessing this demonic clack's infernal ability to keep their subjects zombified through calculated campaigns of manipulation, bribery, and sheer psychological terror, with an extended commentary on their contrived response to catastrophic events like 9/11 and Sandy Hook. Nowicki addresses the struggles faced by the proud man who attempts to render himself immune from the maddening, mesmeric machinations of the totalitarian tyrants. So that's pretty good. Okay, so yeah, you opened the book. I noticed you addressed a couple of issues. One thing that was your reaction, or at least the effects of 9/11 and maybe Sandy Hook, and you addressed the reptilian metaphor in this. I think that's something that's worth exploring because some people don't think it's a metaphor, but I'm not going to shovel that on you.
Oh yeah, I'm well aware of that, and I'm familiar with the whole. I guess David Icke is the main proponent of that perspective that there are these reptilian, like literal reptilians among us who pretend to be human, but they're actually aliens from another dimension. I think that's exactly what he believes. I don't think it's a metaphorical thing in his case. And there are other places like it's one of those things you see on the internet. I mean, there's all kinds of interesting stuff you can go down. I'm sure a person with a curiosity about this, that, or the other thing can go down all kinds of contrived corridors of the internet. And so the whole issue of reptilians, as what David Icke talked about, others have talked about, others have this kind of, there's some stuff that just seems pretty out there, and I'm aware of that. What I am saying in the book, based on some of the research that I've done, some of what I've looked into, and theorized about, just chewed over, more or less, and there have been a couple of different provocations, or I've been inspired to write about this kind of subject matter for a couple different reasons, which we could possibly get into in a minute. But the reptilian thing I just find really works on a sheer metaphorical level, and that is to say, the more I look into it, the more convinced I become that we are ruled by a certain type of person who could be called reptilian. And by that, I don't mean that they literally have a different DNA than the rest of humanity. I mean, in all likelihood, they are made of the same stuff physically as the rest of us. But it seems to me that there's this particular type of personality that more often than not seems to be able to, or not just be able to, seems to have this kind of ruthless will to rise to the top and to seek power and control. And I'm convinced that this type of person, possibly we all have this, I mean, it's said that we have, there's a certain reptilian nature in all of us. And so possibly it manifests more in some people than others, maybe for genetic reasons, maybe for reasons of choice, or maybe some combination of the two. It's really hard to say, but it seems to me, and I write about this in the book, and I've also excerpted from a couple of different sections where I elaborate on this, the notion of the reptilians. Our reptilian rulers is how I preface this section, and I've put it as an excerpt, 2 excerpts, in fact, that I've posted at Alternative Right, our blog post, our blog page. And so readers can look those up if they're interested. Our Reptilian Rulers and Our Reptilian Rulers Part 2. So in these sections of the book, I go into some detail about just who these reptilians are, or what makes them reptilians, and what distinguishes the reptilian from another type of person that seems to be similar. But again, my research, the kinds of things I've looked into, the kinds of observations that I've made, leads me to think that there are actually some important distinctions between what we typically think of as the sociopath or the psychopath and what I'm here calling the reptilian type of person. And I could go into more detail about that now, but I don't know if you want to start by me. Should I backtrack first, or should I go on with talking about the reptilians?
Are you talking about their psychological makeup?
Right.
Okay.
Right. I'll just take this a little bit further now. I guess since I've opened up this can, I might as well finish it off. The difference between what I call the reptilian and what's typically known as the sociopath, and there's a lot of interest these days, you've probably noticed, in sociopaths, sociopathy. There's a lot of fear, but also a kind of intrigue surrounding this supposed type of person that exists. And supposedly the sociopath or the psychopath is someone who has no remorse, has no real conscience to speak of, and therefore is capable of doing anything that we would generally shrink from as morally horrific. The psychopath doesn't feel any qualms about committing particular crimes or doing particular things that most of us, again, would have problems with doing. I'm not saying that we wouldn't necessarily do them, because I do believe in original sin, that we all are capable of doing bad things and often do bad things. But the difference is, when we do bad things, we feel bad about doing them, and the sociopath does not. The sociopath can do whatever he feels like doing, and sort of just doesn't feel any particular way about it at all. He's without a conscience, in the same way that we could talk about a paralyzed man being without the use of his legs, or a blind man being without the capacity to see. So that's the sociopath. But and again, there's a lot of talk about sociopathy these days, but I think that for the reptilian, the kind of person that I'm calling the reptilian, and when you think reptilian, I'm not just talking about politicians, although that's certainly one type of person that comes to mind, one profession that comes to mind. There's of course a lot of power in politics, but there's power in other places as well. So the reptilian type might not necessarily be limited to the political realm. But to me, the reptilian is different from the standard issue sociopath, because the sociopath is, while inclined to, again, do whatever he wants and to not really feel any remorse or sense of shame or any conscience whatsoever, the sociopath, I think, tends to be a kind of person who isn't really possessed of much ambition and generally just sort of goes through life looking for a thrill, looking to get a buzz, going from one thing to another.
This would be like the traveling con man or something.
The traveling con man,
grifter.
exactly. That's can be very charming.
Flim flam man.
The flim flam man.
Yeah.
Somebody who just gets a thrill off of putting one over on people or trying new stuff. They're like, when you're a sociopath, you don't really, you're not capable of emotions like love or companionship or bonding, the sort of things that drive ordinary people to make decisions in life. And so, the only time you really feel alive is when you fly close to the sun in one way or another. And that's why, as I understand it, we often see sociopaths taking on professions that are extremely dangerous because they get, again, a thrill or a buzz off of putting themselves in danger. And then that gets old. They do that for a little while, and that gets old, and they move on to something else. But generally speaking, while an unpleasant kind of person, the standard issue sociopath is not a aggressively malevolent personality. Generally speaking, he's somebody who's content to just, carve out his own niche, do his own thing. And, he's somebody that should be treated warily. And of course you shouldn't trust him and so forth and so on. But generally speaking, he's not a dangerous person unless you get involved with him. Then you're going to be in for some emotional pain because, you're going to, if you trick yourself into thinking that he cares about you, then you're wrong. But still, the not a man possessed of much ambition, as I was saying a few minutes ago. Whereas the reptilian, the type of person that I'm identifying in the book as reptilian, is an intensely ambitious, intensely driven, and utterly ruthless sort of person who not only has no problem treating others cruelly and hurting people, he gets a positive thrill off of it. I really am convinced of this. And again, it's a difference between the sort of person who feels nothing, or who doesn't really care about associating, or it isn't drawn to any kind of what we would think of as an ordinary relationship with other people. That's the sociopath. And this sort of person who is going to do whatever it takes to obtain power and control. And if that involves hurting people, then so much the better. And in fact, again, whereas there's a void in the sociopath, for the reptilian, and I call him a reptilian because I tend to think of this sort of person as extremely, cold-blooded, ruthless, the same way that we would think of a crocodile trawling through the swamp looking for prey, as ruthless, And this type of person, the reptilian, is positively malevolent. So it's not that there's a void there. there's something there, but the something that's there is what could be called, if this isn't theologically untenable, a positive evil, which is to say, they are. This is a type of personality that ramifies outwards, and wants to consume and destroy, and gets a positive thrill off of doing these kinds of things. And again, these kinds of people, I'm convinced, are by and large the kind of people who rule the world. And I'm not saying that everybody in power conforms to this profile that I'm drawing right now, but I'm convinced that a great many, if not a large majority, do conform to this reptilian description that I'm laying out here. And we were talking before the show about what we were going to talk about, and you mentioned, or we were talking about what some of my motivations were for writing this, what prompted me to write this book. This is kind of a different book than a different type of book than I've written before. I've written nonfiction before, and I've written for Alternative Right, written articles, and I've also got a lot of published fiction. But this book is taking things into a kind of different realm than what I have really anything that I've published previously. Although I guess maybe there's some continuations of some certain themes here and there, but generally speaking, it's a departure. And what set me on this road is a couple of things. First of all, I've sort of been a closet, quote unquote, truther, or somebody who is interested in, peeling back the layers and seeing what's really going on or what might really be going on. I've been interested in, alternative explanations of various things, what could be called conspiracy theories. Some people think that's a denigrating phrase. I don't use it denigratingly, but, just descriptively. I've had this kind of, interest for a long time, and I've, through looking into different things, come to certain conclusions that I guess I've more or less kept to myself, although I guess I'm out of the closet now with this interview and with this book and with some other things that I've written about lately. So I've been studying these kinds of things for a little while, and I think that you, judging from the show that you do and some of the guests that you have on, these are the same kind of questions that interest you as well. And I think you can maybe agree that there can be a kind of thrill that one gets when one is studying something, and then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, this person did this, or look, this, from this angle, this is going on, just sort of almost, investigative work. It's almost like true crime, which also is something that, a kind of guilty pleasure of mine. I love those true crime shows on TV. Mm-hmm. I've been into that stuff for a long, long time. But you get a thrill out of somehow seeing things in a whole new light and feeling like you've peeked behind the curtain and seen a little bit of what's really going on. And of course, there's a lot of people with a lot of different theories, and some of it's complete bunk. Some of it is maybe has a lot of problems, but there's some truth to it as well. And it's up to you to sort it all out. And there's something very interesting and exciting about that process. But this is a big but. When I in the course of my studies, in the course of my research, which is more, I call it research, but it's more been this sort of compulsive drive to investigate things and look at things and figure things out. and something that I've done just, because out of a burning interest, to know the truth, being a truth seeker. Well, again, there's a thrill to finding out certain things, or thinking that you found out certain things about, some major event like 9/11 or whatever. But there can be a very, you really are playing with fire when you're looking into this kind of stuff, psychically speaking, emotionally speaking. And I didn't really know that. I didn't. I was.
Is it
I
like
was going.
it's like an intellectual Ouija board,
Well, yeah,
summoning the dark spirits? And
yeah. I don't know if well, maybe it is. In some ways similar to that. I think I was careless in the way that I was going about doing things, because I was just sort of consuming things left and right, and really enjoying it, getting off on the thrill of it all. And then I started to look into certain things, particularly the Franklin scandal, which I think you've had a guest on or maybe you haven't. Maybe it was somebody. Maybe I'm thinking of somebody else, but I'm sure you know of it.
yeah.
And most of your listeners probably do as well. When so I heard about this thing, the Franklin scandal, and I'm not going to go into the details of it right now. But people listening, if they're interested, if they haven't heard of it before, I'm sure you can find out just by Googling. But anyway, I started looking into this particular thing and other events, other allegations that were similar to it. And again, at first it was like gobble 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 gobble. Oh, this is so interesting, and it's dark, yeah, but I was still kind of thrilling to the idea that I was peeking behind the proverbial curtain and seeing the truth. And then at some point, it really, really hit me hard. I mean, and I felt like I'd been punched in the gut, and it was overwhelming what I felt. Just the kind of sorrow that I felt. I mean, it was keeping me up at night. I was haunted, literally haunted, by this particular course of study, to the point where, I actually said to myself, "Dear God, please let this not be true. I don't want this to be true. I want it with all of my being to come to the understanding that this was just a hoax and there was no truth to it at all." But I was not able to convince myself of that, and I couldn't deal. I did fine. I was, I didn't stop my normal day-to-day routine, but on the inside, it was almost like a personal thing. It was very peculiar. I'm distant from all of these events. I don't claim to be, I don't claim to be on the same level as the victims, as far as the pain or the suffering. But I caught a heavy whiff of just almost overwhelming darkness and suffering and pain, and terrible cruelty, that was just really hard to make sense of, hard to put in perspective. And I think that was a big catalyst for writing this book, even though the book does not mention any of those allegations, any of those supposed events. But it was part of what made me start to think, well, the type of people who would do these sorts of things, and the type of system that is set up around them. And again, there's something about, and this was something I mentioned to Henrik on the Red Ice podcast as well, and maybe you can understand this as well, being a fellow Catholic. Like the scandal in the church where priests were, it was mostly homosexual, not pedophiles, but pederasts who were molesting, adolescent or pre-adolescent boys, and they were found out, and then the bishops, instead of bringing them to justice, hushed it up and moved them along, got them supposed treatment, and then put them in another parish where they did the same thing, and this sort of stuff that went on in the church, and not just the church, but the church, in certain places, it was a true scandal. There, the whole notion was, there's certain things you can understand, even if they're terrible and there's no excuse for them. You can understand the idea of, this is bad, and we should stop it, but let's just we can understand the temptation to say, let's just try to keep this under wraps. This is bad PR. Let's just deal with these kinds of things, in house, and that sort of thing. But it seemed like what goes on in these other cases, like with Franklin and other kinds of events similar to it. Recently there was the Jeffrey Epstein scandal involving the Jeffrey Epstein flying celebrities down to some Caribbean island, and similar stuff happening with children. In cases like, and then what happened to him, how he basically got off the hook, and all the corridors of power, everyone who was powerful, whether they were Democrats or Republicans, they just sort of circled the wagons and did what they had to do to just make sure nobody was really punished, and that everything basically went on as before. This seemed like a scandal of a higher order, because this seemed like now one gets the impression that the very reason that the system exists is almost to facilitate this kind of malevolent activity, this kind of these events by which the well-placed and powerful just get their jollies off of hurting the innocent, and like that's almost like what it's for. Like that's what the system is for. It's hard to come away and these people are untouchable. They can't be gotten to.
Yeah, when investigators get close, their planes blow up and.
Right. Yeah. And or they don't go anywhere. Someone lodges a complaint and nothing happens, and that sort of thing. And that seemed like of a much higher order, and that suggested to me that in many ways, the systems that are the systems of government, the mores, the legal system, the things that are supposed to bring justice, it seems like they have been rigged, almost for the very opposite outcome. That to positively seek injustice, to ensure that the powerful prey upon the weak and receive no punishment. And that's a lot to deal with. I mean, that's a lot to have to take in and to deal with. And I'm, I'm nobody special. I'm just some guy. I'm a writer. I'm interested in different things, and I aspire to write great literature to the best of my ability. But I'm not an insider. I don't know anybody. And I don't know anybody who knows anybody, but it's hard for me to. So this is not an expose or anything like that, but it's more or less like coming up with the whole idea of the reptilians, imagining the ruling class as essentially reptilian in nature, was part of what motivated the writing of this book.
Now there is. when you talk about these reptilians, these sociopaths, I think another book is called Snakes in Suits, which invokes the reptilian, imagery there.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And there's been a number of documentaries. One is Iron Fish Head about psychopathy, and there's various ways you can approach it. There's also collective psychopathy, how systems are compartmentalized.
Yeah.
You can think of large institutions, whether it's the CIA, the Department of Defense, or maybe the SS. How you wonder how some of these things can go down, how people can perpetrate such evil, but these institutions have many people working for them who aren't really aware of the big picture. They're just going about doing their job.
Yeah, sure.
And this is
more like the banality of evil.
Yeah, the banality of evil, and this is how the worst crimes in the world have been perpetrated by people just doing their job.
Yeah.
And we get a lot out here in the United States where a lot of people just want to be part of they don't pursue it with any passion or any glee or any malign attitude. They're just doing their job. And I'm thinking about all the people that the clerks and bureaucrats that work at that drive to work every morning, the DOD, without any thought of what the U.S. military is doing overseas. Or the same thing with the intelligence agencies. They're just collecting their paycheck, thinking about the weekend, and wondering what they're going to do when they retire.
And I mean, to some degree, we're all guilty of that. But we have to. I mean, you have to compartmentalize to some degree. It doesn't do any good to just walk around all the time feeling absolutely wounded by the grave injustices that are happening all around you. I mean, you have to carve out some kind of niche for yourself. So I don't necessarily think that makes us all complicit or culpable. But I do think that there are cases where people who ought to know better or who should do the right, who are in a position where they could do the right thing, choose not to do the right thing because they don't feel like it's their place to take a stand or whatever. So it's sort of a distinction to be made there.
But someone said, what if someone gave a war and nobody came? No one showed up.
Yeah, interesting. Interesting notion.
But if you do develop a consciousness and awareness of this, then I think you have a greater moral responsibility. If you have a job or something that involves, supporting a program that is hurting people, and you just go, well, I'm just here to press the button when they tell me to press the button.
Yeah.
And you get a lot of that in the military. A lot of people are having psychological stress because they know, they're operating these drones in some, complex at Langley or out in the West somewhere, and they see what happens. So, they go home for dinner every day,
Right.
But that's the same way that people avoid. I mean, how is it that people can do what they do and then go home and kiss their wives when they get home in the afternoon? But again, part of that is compartmentalization.
Yes, and I would say that not all of them, most of these type of people are not what I would call reptilians at all. I do think that the ones who commit these grave sins and this kind of foul, awful, wretched behavior of one kind or another, and yet are able to compartmentalize from that. Now that's a different level of compartmentalization. That's a different level of, callousness to the pain that one has caused. It's sort of like someone going on a mass killing spree and then just turning around and changing their clothes and then walking in and about walking into some press conference and smiling for the cameras and saying all the right things and it's that kind of compartmentalization, or that where lying and deception come so easily. Now we all know. I mean, I think we have all lied at one time or another. We know the temptation to lie, and that makes sense. There's something human about that, but this ability to lie and to deceive at will, and maybe not even do such a great job of it. Like, that's the thing. These people are not. We almost tend to revere them for being so purely evil, almost like what Father Malachi Martin would call perfectly possessed. Where they're just immune from any, from good, from any manifestation of good anywhere in their being. But they're not always good at it. And I give the example of in one of the excerpts that I post at Alternative Right. I think this is the Our Reptilian Rulers Part 2 section. I give a pair of examples of that. One of them is, a couple specific examples. One of them is just kind of a humorous. It's just kind of funny because it's so goofy and ridiculous. It's a little dated now, but to me it's still a potent example of this. Was Al Gore sometime when he was running for president, saying he was asked what his accomplishments were, what he's proud of doing. And he of course said, well, I took the initiative to create the internet. And it became this infamous sort of thing. And what goes, that's just ridiculous. I mean, that's like a lie that nobody's going to believe. It's almost a careless kind of lie. But again, it's something that comes so easily to these types of people. And that's what I think is, really different about them, and really kind of hard to understand, because we can understand why we would lie under certain circumstances, but to make up that kind of lie and and be able to utter it so shamelessly, and then be able to show your face again afterwards, and not just show your face, but try to become the most powerful man in the world. That's of a whole different order. And the other example that I gave, another famous / infamous example, although this wasn't a lie, this was an actual, apparently, utterance of the truth, and that is when Larry Silverstein was interviewed for, I think in 2002, for, I think, a documentary on PBS, and where he just sort of mentioned, yeah, well, we said it's probably best to pull Building 7, to take it down, and so we made that decision, and the building came down. And it was like you sort of scratch your ears, say, what? I mean, did he really just say that? And it seems that he did. I mean, afterwards they sort of threw some PR flack up there and said, no, he didn't mean that, and tried to spin it one way or another. But I think that if you listen to what he says, in the context in which he says it, without bias, it would seem that that's what he's saying, that they took the building down, and that's a pretty big admission to make all of a sudden. And again, to just state it so baldly as he does there, that's an example of this extreme compartmentalization, where again I don't think he was supposed to have said it. I think it was just a careless admission, but it was said so casually, just like, oh yeah, we control everything, we don't care, we're manipulating everything, yeah, it's happening, it's going on. And again, it's in some ways the very opposite of the Gore quote, because that was a complete lie, and this is a truth that he's not supposed to be telling, from his own perspective, apparently his agenda. But the way in which it's said, again, stated so baldly, so plainly, so in your face, that bespeaks a very different type of personality. But
Well, how could he not go to breakfast that morning on top of the World Trade Center like he did every other morning and not warn the people,
too.
right?
There's that too.
I mean, what type of personality does that? Of course, that
Yeah, because he had a dermatology appointment.
apparently has anyone ever investigated that? What dermatologist? What the name? Let's see the appointment.
Yeah.
Just accepted as face value.
Yeah.
His daughter wasn't. He apparently he also had breakfast with his daughter every morning too, but she wasn't there either. But the same thing with what's his name, the guy who went to Iraq, Paul Bremer, right? He was there that day. He just wasn't. He was there, but he was at the studio to declare Osama bin Laden likely.
Yeah. I mean, the more you look into it, and again, this isn't something I talk about that much. I'm not somebody who shouts it from the rooftops or anything, but really, the more research I've done, the more I've looked into it. There's so many things like that just don't make sense unless the quote unquote official story. I hate that phrase, official story, but it's the only that works. It works, I guess, in this circumstance, unless it's not true, unless the truth is something else. Now, getting back to the book, though, I do want to add that I don't approach the book as it's not a conspiracy book. It's not a here's what really happened and putting forth the details of some particular theory or other on 9/11 or Sandy Hook. Sandy Hook is another thing that I mentioned, another event that I mentioned.
Yeah.
A little bit, and we can talk about that if you'd like.
Well, it's more like about how does once someone is aware of these things, or very suspicious of these things, and the world is something very different than what he was told, how it operates. How does one maintain his composure, his integrity, in such a world? Right?
Yeah. It is. And it's about how. Again, extrapolating from the reptilian notion, if the people in power are largely, very, very, very bad people, who would kill us with delight, if they wanted to, if they decided to, with absolutely no remorse at all.
Like kicking over an anthill or something.
Yeah. Like a sadistic child kicking over an anthill.
I think it was Jay Dyer. He was in an interview. He was talking. He's reading War of the Worlds, and how he made a comment. And this is how I understand War of the Worlds. H.G. Wells. The Martians aren't in real life. The Martians are like how the elite see the rest of the world. How they come in and how the book opens up, how they studied us with cunning and rational cold eyes. Yeah, that goes with your reptilian thing, I think.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But don't they have tentacles too in War of the Worlds? So there.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's not quite. Maybe the tentacles are suggestive of a different type.
Yeah, different type. Yeah,
an octopus or something. I don't know, but whatever type of creature that is.
Yeah.
I'm not up on my phylum right now, but it's so the book. I want to say that the focus of my book it's what I call, and I hope this isn't too pretentious to say, I call it a meta conspiracy book, because it's not about it's not about proposing a specific conspiracy theory. It's not about here's why if you study this picture of Building 7 or blah blah, this is obviously true or blah blah. Now I'm not denigrating that kind of work, and I'm just saying it's not the focus that I take. Basically, what I'm saying, and I think that it's possible. Even I don't know if you have. I mean, people have all different kinds of perspectives on things, and it's possible somebody's listening to this interview who's not a truther, who maybe doesn't know much about the subject, but just sort of thinks that the official story is true. And I'm not condescending towards people who think that either, just because people don't. There's a lot of people just don't have time or the inclination to look into things like that, and so they believe what they're told, not because they're mind numbed slaves necessarily, but just because, they're doing their own thing in life, and this is just sort of off on the periphery. So for my book, although it's clear, if you read between the lines, you don't even have to read between the lines. You can, from what we're talking about now, I'm pretty direct about what my perspective on these things. But I think it's possible to read the book and I think the heart of the book is not about 9/11 and Sandy Hook, being false flags or whatever you want to call them. But it's rather about the idea that if we are ruled by these kinds of people, and, if these kinds of people, if really bad people have a whole lot of power and a whole lot of resources, then they probably know a lot about how to manipulate us. And I think that's the other major theme of the book, is manipulation. I'm somebody who, and again, to just get personal for a second, again, I'm somebody who personally, I think an issue of pride for me is that I like to think of myself as somebody who's not easily manipulated. I like to think of myself as the sort of person who you can't really put one over on, and I'm repelled and disgusted by the idea of somebody, trying to manipulate me, especially through cheap emotional, appeals or whatever. But a man has to know his limitations, like Clint Eastwood says in that movie. We all do have our limits, and it's probable that, they are putting stuff over on us, that, that they have power, we don't. They have all kinds of resources, to spend, to figure out ways to get people to mold, to the ways in which they're, they could best be enabled to mold people to their will, whether it's through, I don't know, MK Ultra, or that whole, going down that whole line of, mind control, alleged mind control programs and stuff, which I know some of it's declassified, so some of it's, already, they've already admitted to having done, or whether it's more subtle methods of manipulation. The whole notion of PR.
Oh yeah.
PR is just propaganda. It's a nicer name for propaganda.
Which is entertainment.
Yes, yeah.
Right.
And I'm not someone who says everything you see on TV is just them. It's what they're trying to do to you. I don't want to sound, I don't want to take it too far and sound, overly paranoid here. I think there's some degree of paranoia that may be reasonable. But I don't want to be tiresome and just say, oh, it's everything you see, hear, read, is just them trying to get to you. But I do think that you have to be aware and you have to be conscious. And also you have to have a certain sense of humility. I mean, humility is a virtue, just like pride is one of the deadly sins. Mm-hmm. Humility is a virtue, and it's through humility that we are able to overcome, paradoxically enough, to overcome the kind of positions that pride forces us into. We can be, and I talk about this in the book as well. There's different ways in which a person can be manipulated. Fear is a very, very potent manipulator. And I talk a little bit about 9/11, what they call, I hate this phrase as well, but I'm just going to use it right now, the optics, quote unquote, of 9/11, just the visuals. And when you think about it, it was this ultra sensational kind of event that seemed like a disaster movie.
Yep.
But it was real, but in some ways it was familiar to us, in that I'm not saying all disaster movies were just to prime us for 9/11. I think that's a foolish thing to say, but it was playing the visuals of there are so many different levels of terror involved, that work upon us on so many different levels. Fear of flying, fear of falling from tall buildings.
That was one thing. You talked about how we all kind of the fear of flying and the fear of heights, and they combine the two. That was very interesting. The book, you put that two together. Yeah.
I mean, you could not get more sensationalistic in that sense. With the visuals of everything we see, and plus these indomitable buildings that represent whatever they represent. I guess that's kind of a Tower of Babel kind of.
Yeah, the Nelson. Didn't they call it the Nelson, the David?
Yeah, I haven't heard that one.
Yeah,
but kind of a Tower of Babel in duplicate. I mean, it's kind of interesting, and I've never really understood. Nothing that I've studied has ever told me why there were two structures almost, exactly similar.
Could be symbology there.
Yeah, there must be. I mean, but it's weird when you think about it. And I've just
you meant the Solomon.
I've read a little
building,
bit.
Right?
That was close by. That was Building 7, right?
Yeah, I think, and there's the two Towers of Solomon. So.
Oh. Yeah, this is Masonic.
Some Masonic thing. Of course, the whole thing why it was built was always considered somewhat of a white elephant because it was built in the middle of a recession. There was a surplus of office space, and all of a sudden they put up these huge buildings under the Port Authority.
Yeah,
taxpayers
domain. I mean, they kicked out the people who were on Radio Row in Lower Manhattan.
Yeah, so
who had businesses there. They said, "Too bad, sorry, you're out of here."
Yeah, there's a very sordid story to that. So so it was the whole thing was conceived in sin. So.
That's true. That's true. That's an interesting observation.
So. So. And by the way, there was a building that was in disrepair and never profitable, and I think there was $1 billion estimate to remove the asbestos.
Right. I heard about that too. I mean, there's so many things, and none of this is in the book, but I've come across a lot of the things that you're mentioning now. And I've read about how the buildings were, like we were talking about before, the whole history of the buildings, how they went up and everything like that, and the circumstances under which they were built, and
and Larry Silverstein's investors made out like a bandit on that, like $3 billion or something on that.
Yeah, and so there's all of that and more, and when one thinks about it in a certain way. If it, even if you buy into the official story, what you still have to admit that it was exploited to the hilt, in a very sophisticated manner by the master class, the ruling class. They used this again the kind of sensationalistic, horrific. All this fear that was mixed in with it, they used it very adeptly to achieve their purpose, whatever it was. I guess to get, if it's the PNAC thing, if that's just a part of it, to get America into all of these foreign wars. I don't know if that was the ultimate end game, but that's the thing with evil. Is there? With say, speaking theologically, Satan, what's his ultimate end game? What is he? Does he really have a plan? I mean, their evil has immediate plans, and they and their minions carry out various plots and schemes in their very sophisticated, adept, sneaky, cunning sort of way. But you kind of think the dynamic of evil, I mean, it's never going to be satisfied, because, again, speaking theologically here, what motivated Satan and the rebel angels in the first place was that they wanted to be God. And no matter what they do, they can't become God. And so, it's kind of, to me, it's kind of an open question what these reptilian rulers, as I've characterized them, what they're ultimately doing, they're wreaking all kinds of havoc, they're doing all kinds of terrible things, and obviously with no remorse and with a great deal of relish and enthusiasm even. But I don't know if they know what their end game is. That's something, I've when I spoke to Henrik the other night, and I've spoken to other people about this, for example, with to make it more contemporary with the current events in Europe, with the rulers of Europe, the EU people, just throwing open the borders and saying, yes, swamp our populaces, just come in, and we have no interest in protecting our countrymen. We just want as many foreign elements in here wreaking as much havoc as possible. What do you think is what are they after with that?
There's a lot of theories. I think the idea is they want to destabilize and weaken the nation states of Europe. Mm-hmm. Maybe to break them up into microstates as a divide and conquer strategy. Mm-hmm. This goes back to the Pan-European movement, the Caligari plan, and mm-hmm. His idea was to swamp Europe with, I guess, darker races and create a mongrel, a sort of miscegenation idea that I guess they believed in back then. And you create a weaker race, and if people are divided and mixed, they don't have a culture, they're easier to rule. And
right.
It's a divide and conquer strategy. Some people have said there's the organized Jewish community, or political Judaism, or Zionism, thrive on weak societies because they're the outsiders.
Right.
And so if you have a weak dominant culture, it's divided. They do better. And I think the whole idea that diversity is our strength is a slogan that comes out of the Anti-Defamation League.
What a lie! I mean, God.
So there's a lot of and you have the multinationals, the multinational corporations, and so I think it's a consortium of interests that are doing this. It's the whole globalist thing. We create kind of a sort of this non-specific, globular, multicultural thing, and you don't, with a multicultural thing, you get no defined cultures.
Right. But do you think that they anticipated that there would be so much chaos so immediately as we're seeing playing out now? I mean, was that by the playbook, or do you think that Merkel and her cronies are kind of saying,
At that level, she might be a little confused. I think at a meta level, I don't think how you can say, hey, let's bring in a couple million people from a different culture and just dump them in these neighborhoods, not expect problems to occur.
I don't see. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like that.
Anyone. An idiot could know that. Someone with an IQ of 80 would be able to tell that.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, if you send in hundreds of thousands of unemployed males from different cultures into a relatively permissive different culture, you're gonna get a rape crisis. This is happening in India, I understand, as well, with the importation of Western media.
Yeah,
it's a culture shock.